Hi everyone, welcome to the Digital Supply Chain Podcast. My name is Tom Raftery, and with me on the show today, I have my special guest, Lyall. Lyall, welcome to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi Tom, thanks for having me on your show. I'm Lyall Cresswell. I'm the CEO and founder of a digital freight tech business, Transport Exchange Group. We operate a marketplace here in the UK and also across Europe and the US, which services the transport and logistics businesses that you probably see out on your travels every day. At the moment, we have about 8,500 operators active on our platform. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the whole concept of B2B digital marketplaces, but they're using our platform to improve the efficiency of their businesses and also the scope of business that they're able to undertake on behalf of their clients. They're trading capacity and loads on our platform. And we then offer the whole order execution within the platform so that both parties who are working together have complete visibility of where their freight is at any given time. So that's been up and running, Tom, for 23 years. We started just after the dot-com crash, if you remember that.
Indeed.
Quite a long time ago now. And in the past 4 years, born out of the need that we saw in Transport Exchange Group, we've created a second standalone platform called Trusted. And that deals with the digital identity and verification and compliance of transport and logistics businesses that are operating both on the platform and also elsewhere in the industry.
Okay, and why? Why? I guess two questions. Why did you set up Transport Exchange Group, particularly, just after the dot-com bomb, and why Trusted?
Sure. So I'd had a previous business which was operating in that industry, and was keen to do something that married together both tech and also marketplaces, which I've always been, a great interest of mine. So the opportunity arose to create a B2B marketplace. And I say that quite deliberately because at that point, there was a huge number of initiatives aiming to improve B2B procurement and collaboration, especially not just in freight transport, but across the board. Given my background in that industry and the understanding that I have of it, it seemed like a natural fit to do that. So I'm aware that maybe as many of your listeners aren't necessarily immersed in our world, but just to describe it for you, transport and logistics is obviously it's a huge industry, but it's also very, very fragmented. So you'll be aware of the household names that you see running their trucks and vans up and down the roads all day, but you may be less aware that there are thousands and tens of thousands of smaller businesses, many of whom are operating less than 4 or 5 vehicles, and they form the backbone of the industry. There's a lot of subcontraction that takes place in the market, a lot of sharing of assets, especially with the kind of sustainability agenda driving increased collaboration to reduce empty running and to make sure that as far as possible, businesses are operating in the most efficient way possible. You can see that there's a tremendous need for a platform like ours, which fosters collaboration, reduces empty miles, and also makes the whole process when businesses transact with one another more efficient and have less friction.
And is that the problem you set out to fix back in 2000 when you kicked off Transport Exchange Group?
Yes, it really was. And what's interesting is we've obviously, the platform has grown hugely in sophistication, if you like, and also the depth of what it offers to the businesses that are on the platform. The goal, I guess, remains the same as it was back in 2000, 2001, which is to have a properly managed marketplace platform, to provide some kind of standard operating procedure for those businesses to work to. And we've stuck to our knitting, if I can use that analogy.
Okay. And then you decided 4 years ago to set up Trusted, which you've just launched this year. So you've spent the last 3-4 years getting it ready for launch. I guess what was the thinking be trusted, and how has it evolved since launch, if it has?
Yes. So as with all of these things, you set off and you don't realize how complicated they're going to be, especially in an emergent area such as ID. I'll go into that in a little bit later. But so just to give you the backdrop here, Tom,
Sure.
ever since we started, we recognized, I'm going back 23 years ago when trust and safety was in digital marketplaces certainly wasn't a recognized area of expertise or even requirement. But we saw that as being intrinsic to the value of our platform. So from the get-go with Transport Exchange Group, we always requested documents such as insurance certificates, anything that we could ask our clients, the transportation companies, the logistic service providers, anything that we could ask of them to prove that they were qualified, that they were competent, and therefore we could let them into the marketplace and let them participate in our program.
Sure.
And I remember actually very early on, some of the businesses were like, well, why do you need our insurances and this, that, and the other? But obviously there was, an understanding that if you're going to run a professional marketplace, you've got to know who the businesses are that are on your platform. It's obvious now. So that's fine, but the complexity of even the smallest business is quite astounding. Because we're dealing here with businesses. We're not dealing with consumer, which is hard enough in itself.
Sure.
We're dealing with businesses. So if I paint a picture that an owner-driver or a 2-truck or a 3-truck or 3-van courier company, haulage company still has probably or should have vehicle insurance suitable for carrying freight or certainly for carrying goods for hire and reward. They should have a freight liability policy or goods in transit. They should have a public liability insurance. There's also the substantiating that their business is bona fide. Many of them or most of them are VAT registered. So an owner-driver should have a driving license, clearly.
Sure.
We want to know about their vehicle. So you start to see that on the face of it looks like a very, very simple, straightforward business actually has a degree of complexity to it. Now, all of those data points are going out of date continuously. Insurances generally will get renewed annually. Driving licenses, it's not such a kind of frequent expiry, but they still expire. Vehicles have MOTs. So you can see that if you want to actually create a fully compliant platform where you really understand that the participants are fit and bona fide to operate, you need a digital process to do this. It's impossible to do it manually.
Sure.
And that's where trust is born from.
Just Lyall, for our American listeners, an MOT, I'm not sure if they use the same terminology in the US.
No, they don't. They will have service inspections, but that's an annual check which is carried out on the vehicle to make sure that it's roadworthy and fit for purpose. And indeed, we've got American customers as well, US customers and Canadian customers. So I'll come back to that if I may, Tom,
Sure.
in a little bit. So what was fascinating is we digitalized, or we set out to fully digitalize this data and to make sure that it was always current and up to date. Now, what I then saw, probably for the first time, I'm guessing about 5 or so years ago, was the first emergent digital ID checks. So here in the UK, but it's the same in other jurisdictions in Europe and in the US, we have various different corporate registries which are a matter of public record. Here in the UK, we have Companies House, which is transparent, but it's been, it doesn't have much in the way in terms of checks and balances. That's something that the government are addressing at this moment. But what I saw that was quite interesting was the ability to actually check that the key individuals in a business were who they said they were. So I don't know if, Tom, have you opened a new bank account recently at all?
Start of the year, yeah.
Yeah. So it's likely, I don't know if you bank with, but it's likely that, first of all, you didn't go into a branch, I'm assuming. You did it online?
No, I actually went into a branch.
You went into a branch? Okay, fine. So you're now in the minority insofar as you actually found a branch, but that's increasingly rare, to be frank.
Sure.
And what I saw in the fintech industry was an emergent technology which allowed you to prove remotely that a natural person, was who they said they were. Those digital identity checks, which generally consist of a selfie which you take on your mobile phone and a liveness check and other checks which are then carried out in the background, allow you to confirm that a natural person is who they say they are without actually meeting them in person. So I saw that, setting up various different bank accounts, and I said, look, this would be fantastic if we can actually marry together this new technology of identity service providers with the corporate data which we can obtain about the business, marry that then together with all of the documentation which we were already requesting from those businesses, as I've just described.
Sure.
And we can actually create a very, very holistic profile of the business and the key individuals within that business. And by being able to do that, I saw that we could make, especially the Transport Exchange Group platform, much more robust in terms of security, trust amongst and between our member businesses. Because remember, they very, very rarely ever meet the other parties that they're trading with. It's, we live in an increasingly remote and digitalized environment. So there has to be a lot of trust placed in both ourselves as Transport Exchange Group. We've proven that over 23 years. We're still here. We're still doing the same things. We've stuck to the same kind of mission statement and values. But as I say, you need to bring in the new technologies to be able to keep the platform as secure as possible. So I saw all these things taking place and set out really to bring all these technologies together in order to create something really kind of fairly truly remarkable in our industry, and keep those profiles up to date.
Okay, so you set up Trusted, which is a new business adjacent to Transport Exchange Group, which allows. Is it just drivers, or is it more than that to actually certify who they are?
Yes. So you've actually asked a fantastic question there, which is on both sides of the equation, whether you're a buyer or a seller in our marketplace or in our industry, it's as important for myself. Let's say I could be an owner driver, I could be a 100 truck operator providing capacity to your business, Tom.
Sure.
You're a third-party logistics operator, for example. It's as important for me to understand that you are who you say you are and that you have all of the correct accreditations as it is for you to credential me as a driver or a provider of the assets. So we have very, very definitely set out to perform the checks and the compliance angle as well for all participants. And what we're trying to do there is to create a very, very fair and transparent approach to verification and compliance, which is industry-wide.
And why set it up as a separate entity? Why not keep it, within Trusted Exchange or Transport Exchange Group? Sorry.
Yes. Okay. So for a start, what we've done is with Trusted is we built it in a completely new tech stack. That was important.
Right.
We fully integrated it with Transport Exchange Group, and we're now just starting to bring in some new product areas which build on the profiles that our users have created in Trusted. I'll come on to those in a second. But we were quite keen to keep it separate to Transport Exchange Group. One of the things that we're now able to offer is that the businesses that have gone through and adhere to the Trusted framework are able to actually port that digital identity and verification wherever they so choose to do it, because obviously they will have relationships and customers who are outside of the Transport Exchange Group platform as well. So we have spent a lot of time making that digital identity for me and my business to be portable and shareable. So that's one of the key reasons why we've kept them separate.
Sure. That makes sense. And what what does it enable? I mean, apart from you being able to certify that I am who I say I am, and I being able to certify that you are who you say you are, what are the risks of not having it?
Yeah, so we see the digital identity and verification and the compliance as being table stakes. Now, there are plenty of accreditation schemes in transport and logistics, so we're not purporting to be an accreditation scheme in that sense. In fact, we're quite capable and happy to incorporate those in to the trusted profile that you may hold. One area where we have a lot of insight into is being able to take that trusted profile, remember it's fully digital, and then apply it in a transactional sense. So unfortunately, in this day and age, as I say, relationships are, generally speaking, especially in transport and logistics, which is a fairly transactional type of industry, it's quite important for a lot of shippers, especially for beneficial cargo owners and shippers, to actually have 100% security when it comes to who's carrying their freight. And in an increasingly kind of diverse ecosystem, it's not that uncommon for there to be a number of carriers and a number of participants who actually manage the freight, depending on what kind of movement we're talking about, from door to door, especially in networks of networks, first mile, middle mile, last mile. I think you're familiar with all of those. So what Trusted now has done, and we've just done a proof of concept with a major 3PL only a couple of weeks ago, is to leverage the digital identity that we've created for me and my business, extend that to the driver pool, and actually start using especially the kind of digital ID and the biometric authentication of the carrier and the driver, and apply it so that when Tom Raftery goes to collect a consignment, we can have 100% security and knowingness, if you like, that you are who you say you are. Especially those kind of key points when freight is handed over. So either the collection of a consignment, the entry into a depot or into a warehouse or into an RDC. There are so many areas where we can actually improve the security within the supply chain or within the transport supply chain that we're focused on. We're only actually even just starting to kind of uncover all of the use cases for that. And what we're doing there is we're protecting not just the shipper. I think that's really important to spell this out. But we're also protecting the carrier and the driver.
Okay.
Because it's pretty important, as I say, for them to know who they're transacting with. So yeah, these are the kind of areas where we can actually bring more value to all of these stakeholders in that ecosystem, are fairly significant.
Okay, and is there a lot of fraud or issues in the system, or is this a solution looking for a problem?
Well, if talking now to your American, to your US listeners, in the US is an increasingly large problem. That's for sure, because I'm not sure if you're familiar, but with the whole concept of double brokering, treble brokering even, that's a fairly sizable and growing issue in the US. In the UK, speaking specific to the UK, we certainly perceive a need, born out of our experience with Transport Exchange Group, to introduce better visibility about who's carrying my freight, and who am I dealing with, who am I transacting with. Do you remember that I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago that we were talking about Companies House here in the UK?
Yep.
So have you been following the whole saga with Companies House and the way that it's
I have
really
not. I've been following a lot of stories out of the UK, including Suella Braverman, but I haven't been following Companies House now.
Okay, right. So Companies House, when you incorporate, but they have the same thing in the US with individual Secretary of States. And in Europe, of course, they have the various different ways of approaching this, using chambers of commerce and such like. Talking specifically in the UK here, we have a government organisation, which is Companies House, where you go and register a corporation. So one of the significant problems and a huge area of fraud actually in the UK has been the absolutely minimal checks that are carried out to date when you go and incorporate a new business here in the UK. unfortunately, it's wide open to abuse, and this was shown up during the whole COVID saga when we had very, 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 very short-term solution, which were these bounce-back loans.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if you're familiar with those.
right? Yeah.
And you had all these companies which hadn't traded or didn't exist before, and they were able to go and set up businesses literally online for a few dollars, a few pounds, and apply totally fraudulently for those loans, which were brought in to try and mitigate the effect of lockdown during COVID. So this has really come to the fore in the UK over the past few months, and they're making some attempts now to address that. You have the same thing, by the way, in the US. So the FMCSA, which is the regulator for the transportation industry in the US, has not been adhering to its own rules. So you're not allowed to create or to get a motor carrier license with a PO box address. But people have been, they've been setting up businesses from offshore locations, purely designed to commit fraud. So where you've got regulators that aren't doing their jobs or doing them very poorly and are really not protecting the industry in the way that they should do, a private business like Trusted, which has very altruistic goals at the end of the day, we're here to raise the bar. We're here to make sure participants in our industry are who they say they are at all times. You can see that we're bringing just that, a significant enhancement, step change to our approach to trust and safety at the end of the day.
Sure. And from a practical perspective, Lyall, how does it work? I mean, if I wanted to get a trusted ID, if that's what it's called, I'm not sure how you call it, a trusted profile, trusted ID, trusted whatever it is, how do I go about getting it?
So it's a purely digital process, which we then assist with on an exceptional basis if somebody has trouble passing through the steps, and it's very much driven by the persona of who you and your business are. So we have a number of different journeys through the platform. Right. So you can go in as, for example, going back really to the smallest types of businesses that Trusted deals with. So you can be a driver with a vehicle. Therefore, you should have different types of insurances. So we set out up front the data that you're going to be putting into the platform. You may or may not be VAT registered. You'll go through the process. We identify at a very early stage what type of business you are. And depending upon the answer that you give there, you're set off on one of these journeys. We will then ask for if you're incorporated as a business, we'll then ask for your identifying number. So here in the UK, it would be your company's house registration number. In the US, it could be for your motor carrier or your DOT number, which are pretty much mandatory in the US. Wise for Europe. Go off to the source of those data, which tends to be, as I say, the government database or government databases. And then we will step into verifying the directors of those businesses. So we're marrying together me and my business. And of course, you might have multiple directors as well in a business, which is reasonably commonplace. So at the end of the day, we end up, as I say, with this very, very holistic profile, which is fully digital and verified.
And for things like insurance or driver's licenses, I mean, for someone who's handy with Photoshop, what's to stop them from, altering some details on a driver's license, for example?
Yes. So the tech actually will detect fraudulent driving licenses in particular, and that's the same as, by the way, you have with a digital sign up for a bank, for example. And we're working with best of breed providers in that space. The bit which is actually really quite interesting alongside that, of course, is the verification of me, the natural person.
Okay.
And that's the tech in that area is always driving to keep ahead of where the fraud is in that. What we're doing, though, is quite interesting because we're asking for different data points as well. So a lot of those data points can be correlated to one another to understand as far as possible, am I a bona fide business? Am I a bona fide person attached to that business?
Okay, fair enough. And do you have any success stories you can talk to?
Yeah, I just mentioned a proof of concept that we did a couple of weeks ago, which was fabulous, actually. It was something that we built earlier in the summer. And in this POC, we one of the businesses on Transport Exchange Group, we posted this on LinkedIn actually, so it's in the public domain. One of the carriers who really likes what they see with Trusted and can see, how it's beneficial for our industry. They were already, as a business, verified by Trusted. They ran their drivers through Trusted, so all of their drivers in this test were verified by Trusted as well. And we've developed a solution which we call check-in. And very simply put, when the driver arrived at a depot, it was a 3PL, a well-known household name for a 3PL, they had already had a load assigned to specific drivers, such that when they arrived at the depot to come and collect that load, we had put the Trusted app onto an iPad. So not proprietary kit at all. This is all software, no hardware required at all, or no specialist hardware. And literally they were able to verify that they were the correct driver who would be assigned to collect that load, specific load, by simply punching in the consignment number and doing the biometric authentication and authorization in the app on the iPad. So in that particular instance, the driver had no requirement. They didn't need an app or anything like that. They had literally been allocated to collect a consignment. Upon arrival, they did the biometric authentication and authorization based on the data points which had been pre-assigned to them. And we were able to say, yes, John Smith is here to collect that load. And then, of course, what we can also do as well is tie that up to the vehicle. So you can see that there are all these different data points which we can bring together to give the highest level of assurance that the individual, that the natural person presenting themselves at that point is who they say they are. And moreover, that they've been authorized to perform that task.
Okay, very good, very good. And where to next? I mean, we see in the kind of the security space, there's a movement away from passwords towards pass keys, for example. In the digital identity space, where do you see the next 3, 4, 5 years bringing you? What's coming down the line that you think is interesting and going to be impacting Trusted and Trusted's customers?
Yes, and that's a really great question. And I think it's actually much sooner than 3 to 4 years because the background to this is digital identity has been hovering around for quite a number of years now, but it's only just starting to, I guess, become an everyday occurrence. And not always very obviously. And the reason I say that is more and more of us are now using contactless payments on our phones. Mm-hmm. We don't tend to think of that as digital identity, but in fact it is. It's the act of paying with your identity as proven by your Apple or your Droid device. So if I turn that into a real case scenario as far as Trusted goes, I've already mentioned the fact that we can actually, evidence that we are the correct driver in that particular instance or the correct carrier, the authorized carrier, come to collect or deliver that consignment, especially upon the collection. Mm-hmm. And there are some very secure supply chains that you're probably aware of where that's pretty important to know, not just a squiggle on a hardened device or something like that where who the hell knows who you were, right? I'm actually talking about proving that Lyall Cresswell has actually physically met and presented themselves to another. So what we're now looking at in Trusted is where can we bring in more use cases to leverage that proven and verified digital identity for me and my business. What's the most obvious one is logging in to the TEG platform, for example. And why is that beneficial? Well, it means I can actually go passwordless, which I think everybody would be very receptive to, because the control that gives me over, just a username and a password, even if you've got multi-factor authentication in place, you can see the benefits there. So there are some really solid use cases where, as I said, Trusted is designed to be a portable digital identity. You can see that you can start to deploy that in many, many different use cases and scenarios.
Cool. Great. We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, Lyall. Is there any question I haven't asked that you wish I had, or any aspect of this we haven't touched on that you think it's important for people to be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, I guess one of the interesting things is the intersection which I described, where digital supply chains meet their physical twin. And I think that's something that up to now hasn't been dealt with much success. There are very, very sophisticated digital platforms out there. We all use them all the time. But until the robots take over, which I guess, depending upon who you talk to, isn't that far away. But we still live in a world where it's important to know who you're dealing with, not just the entity, but also the people behind and involved with that entity. And I think that's been an area which has been overlooked and hasn't kept pace with the digitalization of everything that we do.
Yeah.
You see that in social media. It was fascinating when Elon Musk bought Twitter, and if you recall, over a weekend, he decided that for a few dollars a month you were going to be able to verify yourself and add your blue tick. Yeah. But that had, if you think about it, I mean, it took him longer than a weekend, because it's quite complicated once you get into the details. But if social media, which allows people or bots, who are you actually communicating with a real person? Is it a bot? Are they who they say they are? I think that proving that has fallen way, way behind where the digital environment has got to. And I think that's increasingly important. I want to know who I'm talking to. I want to know that that individual is real and they're not passing themselves off for whatever reason. So the whole area of digital ID and verification, we're dealing with it for businesses, which is obviously a degree more complicated than for individuals and consumers. But you can see that it's a pretty important area if we're to continue to have such reliance and faith and confidence in the digital platforms that we use.
Sure.
And Trusted and Transport Exchange Group is a microcosm of that, because what we do, our business is around collaboration between different entities, and you can see that it's a fundamental aspect of a success for a platform like that.
Yep. No, absolutely. Lyall, if people would like to know more about yourself or any of the things we discussed on the podcast today, where would you have me direct them?
So we have Transport Exchange Group, that's easy to find, transportexchangegroup.com, and Trusted, that's without the E, so it's trusted.net. You can Google that as well. And we're at a stage now where we started building and designing Trusted 4 years ago. It's a work in progress still, because there's so much that we want to do with it, so much that we can do with it. The tech is continually evolving, and we're always fascinated to, now once you start to get into production mode with these things, as I've got experience with, of course, you start to really understand where you can add value. And we're always super keen to hear from people and businesses that are involved in supply chain, how we can improve their business and their operations.
Great. Fascinating. Lyall, that's been really interesting. Thanks a million for coming on the podcast today.
And thanks for having me on. I've really enjoyed it.